Thank you, and good evening, Seattle. It's wonderful to be back here, and thanks to Kashama Sawant for that overly generous introduction. And it's very rare, I must tell you, that people pronounce names like Tariq Ali correctly, and Arundhati Roy, and Vandana Shiva. So thanks so much, and you're so privileged to have someone of her caliber in this city representing you. And I understand there's a primary coming up, a very critical vote on August 4th. You have this possibility here of Seattle, again, kind of leading the way for the rest of the country. Thanks to Town Hall and for hosting, to Scott Chaplin, who organized this pretty back-breaking tour, I must say. It started in Bellingham last Wednesday, and then we went to Vancouver, over to Victoria and Nanaimo, then back south to Langley and University of Washington yesterday afternoon, and this, the final appearance here in Seattle. Well, there's so much to talk about, and I'll try not to compress everything into a New York minute, but I will speak rather quickly and try and make some quick connections so you can have the kind of longitudes and latitudes that the corporate media are so successfully omitting in terms of understanding the parameters of why the Middle East is in the situation it is today, West Asia, what role do the media play, what role does propaganda play in misleading people into really false conclusions about U.S. Policy. Now, I was reading the South Whidbey Record. This is a little bit off topic, but Seattle, I'm sure you all read the South Whidbey Record. And here is the Shell Polar Pioneer oil rig passing Useless Bay. That's the caption. There is a useless bay over here. And I was thinking, wow, if there was ever a useless piece of machinery, it is this spaceship, which looks like the Death Star from Star Wars or something out of Avatar, which is now ensconced in your harbor, not very far from here. And as in the late 1990s with the uprising here against the WTO, the kayakistas have captured the imagination of people locally and nationally and internationally. And I think it's again a very critical moment for the environment, and we need action on these particular issues in a most urgent way. I just want to correct one thing in the introduction. You can hear alternative radio on KUOW. It's on Wednesday evenings from 11 to midnight. So as I say, this is a program in the Seattle area for the night owls, KUOW 11 o'clock on Wednesday nights, and for early birds, KEXP Saturday mornings at 6, and Sunday mornings on KSER from 7 to 8. And just a word or two about alternative radio, which will be 30 years old next year. Thanks. Dissent in the country is under enormous attack. Not only in this country, I just spent a few days in Canada, Harperistan, as I call it, led by a fundamentalist Christian who is yoked to the oil magnates in the province of Alberta, and he is trying to pass through the Canadian Parliament a very repressive legislation, even equivalent or beyond the Patriot Act, and there's been muzzling of science and scientific reports. Some exciting news, though, in Canada against that landscape is that in what is called Alberta is called Texas on steroids. The regime that has been in power, the Tories, the so-called PC, was ousted last week by Rachel Notley and the New Democratic Party after 44 years of unbroken conservative rule in Alberta. So there's a little bit of light amidst the darkness as well, and there's going to be a general election in Canada later this year. I just returned from Turkey about just before this, embarking on this Northwest tour. I went there in connection with the centenary of the Armenian genocide, which happened in 1915. Some of you may know from my name or my background that both my parents are from Turkish Armenia, Western Armenia as we call it. And this is a genocide called by the New York Times the first one of the 20th century that continues to be denied by the Turkish state. Now, I don't want to single out Turkey here entirely because states often invent their past. They mythologize their own history. They create fictions out of fact. We have that here as well with this kind of infallible aura around the founding fathers and the pioneers and the settlers, who overcame tremendous odds in settling the United States. So it's not unique to Turkey, but in this particular instance, it has a very immediate family connection. I was asked by David Harrington, whom some of you may know, the founder and director of the Kronos Quartet, to write something about the Armenian genocide because Kronos was going to perform in Yerevan on April 29th. And so I put this particular poem together, and I read it in Ankara. I've also read it in New York and a couple of other places. By this time, I think I can get through it without breaking up and crying. It's called A Century is a Long Time, It Is and It Isn't. And I'll stop to give some explanations because there's some things that need to be explained here. A century is a long time, it is, it isn't. In Ankara, I came across a quote from Mustafa Kemal Pasha, known as Ataturk, the founder of the Turkish Republic, the great national hero whose picture is everywhere, his statue is everywhere in Turkey. And he said, interestingly, that a people that does not know its own history cannot possibly survive. And so when I mentioned this to the audience in Ankara, which was entirely composed of Turks and Kurds and other minorities and Armenians as well, there was laughter and applause because they hadn't heard this quote from Ataturk. A century is a long time, it is and it isn't. It's important to complete the poems and eat the last pieces of lavash and sujuk. Lavash is Armenian flatbread, and sujuk is cured meat. Our grandparents are singing, let's finish their songs. The lost child of an Armenian village cries out, Mayrig, Mayrig, Ures, Mayrig, Minagem, Gavachnam. Mama, Mama, where are you? I'm all alone and afraid. Those who control the present control the past, and those who control the past control the future. Orwell. Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Santayana. The struggle of humankind against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. The assassination of Allende quickly covered over the memory of the Russian invasion of Czechoslovakia. The bloody massacre in Bangladesh caused Allende to be forgotten. The war in the Sinai drowned out the groans of Bangladesh. The massacres in Cambodia caused the Sinai to be forgotten. And so on, and so on, and so on, until everyone has completely forgotten everything. That's Milan Kundera, the Czech writer. Who today speaks of the annihilation of the Armenians? Adolf Hitler, who was very well aware of what happened in 1915 and was inspired by the Turkish example and the lack of accountability. There were no war crimes. None of these perpetrators of mass murder were ever brought to justice. The past is never dead. It's not even past. William Faulkner. Yergir. which is the Armenian word for homeland. And when I was growing up in New York in the 1940s and 1950s, and I'd be surrounded by these old-timers, survivors of the genocide, and they always talked about Yergir. It was a magical place. I mean, the water was so pure and sweet, and the air was so clean, and the fruits and the vegetables were so tasty and delicious. No doubt, all of this is imbued with quite a bit of exaggeration. But it was, again, this place that I heard about as a child. A magical place full of wonders and cruelties. Bedros, my father, was born in 1895 near Palu in what is now central Turkey, during the Hamadian massacres. These were the prelude to the genocide which was to ensue in 1915. And from 1894 to 96, about 200,000 Armenians were killed during the reign of Le Sultan Rouge, the bloody Sultan Abdul Hamid II. In the same year my father was born, 1895, Barsam, his father, that is to say my grandfather, disappeared, never to be seen again. Bedros left Yergir. 80 years later, he is hit and killed by a car on 87th Street and 1st Avenue in New York, just a couple of blocks from where I grew up. The car was driven by a Turk. When I told my sister what happened, she said, Jagadakir, it's written on your forehead. It can't be avoided, a kind of fate. Turkey, a crime scene. No more Enver and Talat statues and streets. Now, Enver and Talat were the two masterminds, architects of the extermination of the Armenians. And when you go to Turkey today, and I was just there, you find streets named after them, parks, colleges, universities, state buildings, and even with paintings and photographs and statues. Imagine if you went to Germany today, which has been able to face its heinous past, and walk down Hitler Boulevard or Goebbels Strasse, or visit the Goering building for science and aviation. You'd be rightly appalled. Well, that's the situation that exists today because of propaganda, because of the state's insistence that there was no genocide. The US ambassador at the time to Istanbul in 1915 was Henry Morgenthau, father of the New Dealer Hans Morgenthau, grandfather of the noted American historian Barbara Tuchman, a lineage that goes right down to Bob Morgenthau, who was a legendary district attorney in New York for many, many years. And he was the ambassador. He was getting reports in the capital from his consuls and other Americans who were in the interior as to what was happening to the Armenians. And so he confronted Talat, the Minister of the Interior, who was one of the two masterminds of the genocide, and he asked Talat, "Where are the Armenians heading?" And Talat answered, "Their destination is the abyss." And I should add that Talat made a side comment to Morgenthau that, hey, you're a Jew. We are not bothering the Jews. Why are you concerned about the fate of this small Christian minority? Morgenthau said, we care about humanity, not just, specific groups. My mother, Araksi, remembered in early 1915 there was a plague of locusts in her village north of Diyarbakir. The elders said it was a bad omen. They weren't kidding. The death march that followed. Before the death march, when all the women and children were sent on these deportation caravans into the Syrian desert, into the abyss, as Talat promised Morgenthau, all the men, including my grandfather, Giragosyan, were murdered before, and from teenage up to 50 and 55. So there's only the elderly and the very young. My mother was 10 years old at the time. She had three younger brothers. She was looking after them. And my mother because she knew what was going on in terms of the rapes and the abductions of young girls, dressed my mother as a boy and smeared her face with charcoal so she would look, very unattractive, and had her hair up, so that it wouldn't be revealed that she was a girl. The ground was so hot, my feet were burning, Sarkis Hagopian told me. He's a survivor I interviewed. We were so hungry, we ate unripened fruit. We were so thirsty, we wet our parched lips with horse urine, my mother told me. The last time she saw her mother and brothers was in Urfa, which is right near the Syrian border. We, the keepers of memories and dreams, keep coming up to remind you and ourselves of the past, a faded but dear landscape drenched in blood. We live in their ashes and beyond them. Against the ruin of the world, there is only one defense, the creative act. Let us play again in our gardens and fields and glory in the beauty of the flowers forever. A century is a long time. It is. Here comes those moments I was anticipating. A century is a long time. It is and it isn't. Bari Janapar, which is Armenian for safe travels, bon voyage. Shenora Galem, thank you. So that was a century is a long time. I wanted to share that with you so that you would know kind of where I'm coming from and what my background is and why I'm doing this radical work that I have been doing for these many decades, and why I've been working very closely with Chomsky and Zinn and Said and Tariq Ali and Arundhati and all the others that were mentioned in the introduction. And as I said, states invent who they are, and we're no different. And we need to, we see that right now in terms of the Middle East, where every US action is constantly couched in altruism, in humanitarian rescue missions, in liberating people, in delivering democracy to other people who are not as fortunate as we are to enjoy the fruits of a democratic system. Well, you can see my T-shirt here, fighting terrorism, Homeland Security, fighting terrorism since 1492. The native peoples of this country, and they're called First Nations in Canada, have a very good understanding of American or US history and what happened to them, and we are yet to confront that past squarely and to acknowledge it, as we do not confront and acknowledge what we did not only after enslaving and bringing African Americans to these shores, but the rape and murder of so many, estimated to be in the millions. That is what an independent media should be focusing on, the truth, not the concocted, fabricated stories of empire. Now, I also bring you greetings from Boulder, Colorado, not where the airport is, but the airport is in Denver, and just last week when I was there, I decided to write Ode to Scareports. These have become real danger zones for people like me. I was deported from India, from the airport, on September 23rd, 2011, with a valid visa. I've been visiting India since 1966. And just recently, a few months ago, I was denied a visa again to travel to that country. Why? Because of inconvenient facts, as Orwell would say, with bringing out information about the predatory nature of Indian corporations and the rapacious and violent acts of the Indian state repressing people from the Northeast in Arunachal Pradesh area, to Kashmir, where 80 to 90,000 Kashmiris have died in a revolt that began in the late 1980s. Hundreds of thousands have been imprisoned and tortured. Many thousands have been disappeared. This might qualify as one of the most underreported and unreported human rights tragedies in the world today. How is that possible? Effective uses of propaganda. I was in Victoria the other day and saw a huge poster in a travel agency of incredible India, you know, and there was the Taj Mahal. The Indian government has been very skillful in deploying its assets to project a certain image of India as this, you know, the land of Gandhi, the land of Buddha. Everyone's a vegetarian. They spend time in ashrams. They practice yoga. You know, they play sitar, and just a wonderful, wonderful, magical place. The reality, like other realities, is, you know, flies in the face of that constructed image. And so people don't know about what's going on in Kashmir or in the central parts of India, places I visited like Jharkhand, other areas, Chhattisgarh. There's a huge revolt going on. I was asked yesterday by students and others in the University of Washington, well, you know, how do we fight back? You know, how do we fight the power, right? There's this powerful state, there are corporations, there's a media system that supports the state and the corporations. How do we fight back? And I just give the example of the poorest of the poor in India. In these areas, mostly tribals, Adivasi, some Dalit, some formerly called untouchables, rising up against these corporations who are there to loot and plunder their assets, from timber to water to coal to iron ore to manganese to bauxite. All of these things are up for sale. The state colludes with corporations, does that sound familiar, to produce these kinds of outcomes where they can maximize profits, and then some crumbs are thrown to the people. You know, be happy, we'll get you a cell phone tower. They don't have food to eat, but they'll have a cell phone tower, you know, and they should be quiet. So, India is a very contentious area. To get back to airports, so I wrote Ode to Scareports, and you know, TSA, what that means, thousands standing around. Maybe you noticed this at Seattle, except for a few moments when there's a rush, there's literally thousands of them standing around. It's mushroomed into a bureaucracy of well over 60,000 employees. It's a budget exceeds $7 billion, and it is growing. And this, I was inspired to do things like this by Howard Zinn, by the way, was also, I mean, just a wonderful historian, but also a bit of a prankster. He liked to use humor. Hey, TSA, how many people have you pulled over today? Who have you frisked and in what way? Lies, 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 fill up agency files. UAVs rain death from the skies. Pilotless drones will blow out your eyes. Liberties, schliberties, the Bill of Rights have taken flight. Be full of fright. Spy, 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 into the night you'll fly. Government agents, look out, here comes the FBI. IEDs, RPGs, WMDs, DHS, CIA, NSC, DIA, NSA. There goes the USA. There goes the USA. There goes the USA. Now, the great Canadian songwriter and poet Leonard Cohen wrote a song in, I think it was around 1974. It was called Democracy's Coming to the USA. This was said as a statement, as an affirmative. I think if he were considering rewriting the song today, he might put a question mark at the end of that. Is democracy coming to the USA? Well, as Michael Parenti has observed, and I believe correctly, the real danger we face is not from terrorism, but what is being done under the pretext of terrorism, the undermining of our civil liberties, the manufacturing of consent, the manufacturing of enemies and new enemies. When the old enemies disappear, new enemies are created. And the political system, of course, responds with cyanide or arsenic. These are the choices we have often. Fortunately, you don't have that choice when you have a candidate of the caliber of Kshama Sawant. But there it is, cyanide and arsenic. Pick your poison. You can have a debate about this. I'm talking about the Republicans and the Republicrats. There isn't that much space between the two. There is some, but on crucial issues of predatory capitalism and maintaining the American empire, there is virtually no difference. There's a discussion about tactics, and that's the debate that goes on in the corporate media. Well, should we have boots on the ground in Syria? Incidentally, they have boots on the ground. There was just an invasion of Syria a couple of days ago, supposedly killing a high-ranking senior ISIS leader. You'll notice that in all of these reports that come out in the corporate media about U.S. drone strikes or direct air strikes, it's always, almost without exception, a senior commander is killed, a mastermind, or an architect. They never kill a janitor or a secretary or someone who goes to get chai for the boss. It's always a senior commander. It's a very interesting thing. And right now, Seymour Hersh is in the news very much because he's written a story about what an alternative to the government, the official narrative of what happened during the raid on Abbottabad, where Osama bin Laden was hiding out, surely with the knowledge of high levels of Pakistani intelligence. I mean, this is like a no-brainer. I mean, I was in Pakistan multiple times throughout this period, and I was certain that he was in a major city, and I was certain that he was being protected by very high officials within the state apparatus, the deep state in Pakistan. It didn't take any genius to figure this out. And I think an interesting question is, why was there no attempt to take bin Laden alive and to prosecute him for crimes that he was alleged to have committed? I don't doubt that he had committed some crimes, but killing him off, of course, was a convenient way not to reveal inconvenient facts about the U.S. relationship with bin Laden, particularly in the 1980s in Pakistan, in neighboring Afghanistan. Very inconvenient facts about the great liberal, humanistic, feminist Saudi Arabia regime. Yes, they're well known for their devotion to human rights and the like. So what's going on now in the media? Hersh is being condemned. Why is he being condemned? Because he's using anonymous sources. He's gotten leaks, and this is a pretty common practice. And so his information is being dismissed because he's deployed these anonymous sources. Well, I just happened to go to a recent front page article in our best newspaper, all the news that's fit to print or omit, as the case may be, the New York Times. This is from a single report. According to administration sources, U.S. authorities say, U.S. officials said, an American intelligence agency operative commented, an Obama confidant said, officials believe, a senior American official said, an administration source said, a Pentagon source said, several U.S. officials said. Now I have to vary the number a little bit for variety's sake. Administration sources revealed. So here you have, and that was incomplete. You can go any day, you can understand how the media are used by the state power in terms of being a conduit for leaking. And now we have a, constitutional lawyer, Nobel Peace Prize winning president who has prosecuted and sent to prison more whistleblowers than all of the previous administrations combined since the passing of the Alien and Sedition Act in 1917. And they're going, of course, not only after the people that have been jailed, most recently Jeffrey Sterling, but of course Edward Snowden. They're after Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. They've thrown Chelsea Manning into jail for 35 years or some insane sentence. And I say this all over the country, and people spontaneously applaud. This is not a cue for you, but if no, wait, let me finish. let me get you the line. If Obama had any cojones, cojones is a Sanskrit word. I studied in India, so I want to show off that I, have some knowledge there. If he had any cojones, he would give the Nobel Peace Prize, which he did nothing to deserve, to someone like Chelsea Manning, to WikiLeaks, to Edward Snowden, restore Snowden's passport, allow him to travel free, and honor him as a whistleblower, not condemn him as and here's a lawyer, right, talking in public that obviously Snowden has committed crimes. Kerry also has condemned him. There is a notion somewhere out there that one is innocent until there's a presumption of innocence. Well, and the leaders of the state have a presumption of guilt when it comes to Snowden. So he should turn over his Nobel Prize to them. That would be some real justice. And then we have, wonderful candidates that are looming. It's hard, to, praise them enough. We all must feel proud of the likes of, Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. My favorite is Mike Huckabee. But again, the choices are really tough. Hillary Clinton is out there, Jeb Bush. Real alternatives to the power structure. It was Hillary, who made a fool of herself more than once when she declared during the Tahrir Square uprising in Cairo in January and February of 2011, and I'm quoting here, "No country in the world has done more for democracy in Egypt than the United States of America." And this was said before an assembly of, our press corps. That's what they are. They're dead bodies posing as journalists. They are prostitutes for, practicing a form of prostitution. I know it's an art. I certainly cannot do it. They're, lapdogs with laptops, and as I say, one of my books is called Stenographers to Power. They didn't burst out, like we'd say in New York and say, "Are you kidding? Is that a joke, Hillary? We have done more for democracy. We have destroyed democracy in Egypt and other countries in the Middle East because we don't want independent nationalism, independent Arab nationalism. We don't want them to control their resources because, as George Kennan told us in the late 1940s, this wonderful, humane, intelligent State Department planner, that's our oil. Direct quote. And whoever controls it has a veto power over the rest of the world. And so it has been a single-minded effort of administration after administration, particularly since the end of World War II, when the U.S. emerges as the global superpower, that the U.S. was going to laser-like focus on the Middle East and control and dominate that area. So if there's an independent nationalist in Iran, for example, got to get rid of him. See my book, Targeting Iran, out there. Mohammad Mossadegh. He didn't understand what Dr. Kissinger, Charlie Rose's favorite guest, he didn't understand what Dr. Kissinger calls realpolitik. He thought that the oil resources of Iran should benefit the Iranian people. How weird is that, right? He didn't understand that the oil resources of Iran go directly into banks in London and New York. So he nationalized the oil, and the Eisenhower administration overthrew Mossadegh in 1953, restored the Shah to the peacock throne, leading to 16 years of 26 years of a repressive regime, the creation of Savak with the help of the Israeli Mossad and the CIA, torture chambers in Iraq, and actions in Iran. Actions have consequences. That coup directly destroyed the possibility of a democratic development in Iran and leads directly to the Islamic Revolution of 1978 and 79. And still Iran is on the front burner because US policymakers are still burning that, Iran is not theirs. It had always been a huge strategic asset during the Shah's reign in that period of 1953 to 79. US bases, US corporations, enormous amount of penetration. The Tsar, yeah, it's kind of a czar. The Shah turned around those billions of dollars he made from oil sales to US-only corporations. The British were completely pushed out of Iran. That was part of the deal. Were turned around to buy weapons from your neighbors, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, and the other, conglomerates of the military-industrial complex, which on January 17th, 1961, Eisenhower actually said something right. He did very little during his administration, but he did say, he warned the American people about the growth of a military-industrial complex and the dangers it posed for democracy and freedom in this country. If he were around today, two things to say about that. If he were around today, he'd be very old. Three things to say. The second thing would be he'd have no place in the Democratic or Republican Party. I mean, he'd be regarded as a lunatic, someone on the fringe somewhere, mumbling things about the warfare state and the military-industrial complex. While he could do something, he did very little, and he okayed that coup in Iran. Now, all of this, of course, US policy in that part of the world and other parts of the world depends on an enormous amount of subterfuge and stealth, which the media admirably carry out. They've got some great water carriers like Thomas Friedman, David Brooks, Charlie Rose on PBS, almost the entire staff of, many of the staff of NPR and other outlets that kind of just embed assumptions about US power, its innate benevolence and altruistic impulses. That's the trajectory it's on. And then they'll have a discussion about tactics. As I said earlier, well, should they use B-52s or B-2 stealth bombers? And then you have a huge debate between this retired general or this representative from a think tank who was a former member of the military or an administration. Many times their credentials are not revealed in terms of their past connections. So people have been even on the payroll of some of these corporations, and they're not identified as such. They're talked about as a war hero from Vietnam or whatever, lieutenant colonel with the fruit salad of medals there. So power, and this comes from Samuel Huntington, one of the great liberal thinkers of the era. He said, "Power remains strong when it remains in the dark. Exposed to the sunlight, it begins to evaporate." This kind of like the Dracula test here. And the media have been able to insulate themselves by being a kind of echo chamber for the prerogatives of the corporate state and the imperial state. We have to talk about imperialism when we're talking about American foreign policy. This is not something in the ancient past, Rome, Greece, Soviet Union, the Brits, the French, the Dutch, and others, the Belgium and the Congo. No, we have to talk about imperialism here. It's so important to use, I would say, correct language that defines what the problem is. When you have a system that's based on the extraction of resources and the domination of other peoples, that is a system of empire. And we are paying we the people, pay an enormous price for that empire, much less than what the people who are the victims of our multiple interventions. There was just an editorial the other day on Iran in the New York Times reminding us that 1,400 Americans lost their lives in fighting in Anbar province. You know, the Iraqi city of Ramadi was just captured by ISIS. And in that fighting in 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1,400 Americans died. I'm sorry they died. That's way too many. How many Iraqis died? Apparently that wasn't a figure that the New York Times cared to print in that particular editorial. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Iraqis have been killed. Millions have been displaced internally, internal refugees and external refugees. When the last time I was in Syria, 2009 it is now, I met many Iraqi refugees who had to leave because of the sectarian fighting that the US invasion of 2003 ignited. And so, you know, when a state takes a sledgehammer and you know, destroys the Iraqi state, dismantles the military, the police, all the structures of power, you have a situation of anarchy. In a situation of anarchy, who comes to the fore? People with guns. Where do they get their guns? You know, money is coming from, according to Hillary Clinton, to quote her again, donors in Saudi Arabia constitute the most significant source of funding to Sunni terrorist groups worldwide. I didn't say this is Hillary Clinton. Not even in Iraq, worldwide. We saw that in Afghanistan, where they aided the then, you know, Al-Qaeda, nascent Al-Qaeda. This is something that's covered by Iqbal Ahmed in this particular book, Terrorism, Theirs and Ours, which has a photograph, by the way, you know that phrase about a picture's worth 1,000 words? This is worth about 1,000,000 words. This is Ronald Reagan. Anyone here old enough to remember him? He was a two-time president of the United States, a former Hollywood actor, called the Great Communicator. Well, he communicated on this occasion after these Afghan Mujahideen were in the Oval Office that these were the moral equivalents of the founding fathers and freedom fighters. Well, it's interesting to know, you know, who these people are. Axe murderers, rapists, drug traffickers, warlords, misogynists, patriarchs. That's who we aligned ourselves with in Afghanistan. Money came from Saudi Arabia. The training was done by the Pakistani military, and all the other logistics were organized by we, the taxpayer, because we love freedom and we want freedom to spread. Look at Afghanistan today. What kind of horrible outcome that country is still enduring. And in Iraq as well, with the rise of sectarianism, where the Americans under Bush and Bremer and Wolfowitz and Rumsfeld and all of those characters who should not be having a good time, as they are now, but they should be doing time. Every single one of them is guilty. Every single one of them is guilty of major war crimes. They are not in any way different from Nazi war criminals that launched attacks on Poland or France or Norway or any of the other countries in Europe. And they have gotten away with murder. They speak at our colleges and universities and get, you know, $100,000, $200,000 speaking fees. They write memoirs. They don't write them, they hire ghostwriters, you know, and sign $20 million contracts with, you know, Simon & Schuster or, you know, these major book monopolies. And they go on their merry way, and then they're interviewed as, you know, pundits, as experts. They're given very reverential treatment instead of being called out for who they are, major war criminals. And I think it's a shame on us that we have a system here, and Obama is part of that system, Remember when he said in 2009, shortly after being elected by a huge majority, that it's time to move forward. We don't want to look back. At that moment, you should have known that Obama was going to willy-nilly commit war crimes himself. So he couldn't possibly call for the criminal justice system, which is so vigorous in attacking people that I've mentioned, like Binney and Sterling and other whistleblowers and Chelsea Manning and Snowden, and totally ignores unambiguous, uncontroversial war crimes on a huge scale for which we are all paying partly, but the major price is being borne by Afghans, by Pakistanis, by Iraqis, by Syrians, by Egyptians, by Yemenis, by Somalis. I mean, again, you know, like the great philosopher Lily Tomlin said, you know, no matter how cynical you get, you can't keep up. I mean, it was just a few months ago. You know, look at the record. Obama was touting two countries as U.S. foreign policy success stories. Do you know what the countries were? Yemen and Somalia. Both of them are broken, failed states where civil war is, you know, going on, and those were the examples of success stories. Again, you know, it's hard to do justice to this kind of a system. And I was reading. I usually don't read Thomas Wolfe. I don't have much time to read fiction these days, unfortunately. But I was looking at Look Homeward, Angel, and Wolfe writes, "The seed of our destruction will blossom in the desert." And I think we see that. I think we see now the evisceration of the U.S. empire. Certainly economically, the country is much weaker than it was before it launched these multiple wars in the Middle East, before it established commands in Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, and elsewhere. You know, very much as Orwell predicted in 1984, different parts of the globe became regions of U.S. Military commands. There was a wonderful bumper sticker that I saw here yesterday in Seattle. 1984 was a warning, not a manual for operation, not something to be implemented. Yeah, it was a warning. Not a guidebook. Yeah. Alex Carey, probably some of you have not heard of him, a very distinguished Australian sociologist. He characterized this era with three important developments. He said, the growth of democracy, that is the extension of, he's talking about the Anglosphere primarily. By that I mean New Zealand, Australia, Canada, US, and England. In the Anglosphere, this 20th century has been characterized by three important developments. One, the growth of democracy. Two, the growth of corporate power. And three, the growth of corporate propaganda as a means of protecting corporate power against democracy. And in that struggle, the corporate media has enlisted itself on behalf of the corporations, of power, not of the people. So these old, you know, there's still a journalism school here at U of W. I know I went there yesterday. We don't have one in Boulder, so the University of Colorado has eliminated its journalism school. But the old axioms about journalism, you know, have been turned on their head. For example, young students were taught to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. It's now the opposite. They afflict the afflicted and comfort the comfortable. So there's all these puff pieces about our geniuses like, you know, Warren Buffett and how he's turned Berkshire Hathaway into this investment giant, and you know, the wonderful Jeff Bezos here with Amazon, and what a, you know, titan of industry and entrepreneurial innovation he represents. He's one of Charlie Rose's favorite guests, by the way. Most recently he was on, you know, and Rose would throw these softball questions. Well, what's on your table now? What's next? What's looking at? Well, Charlie, we're going to start distributing by drones. We're going to deliver our books and our, canned tuna and, Sony tape recorders or MP3s right on your doorstep with drones. And then, Rose, gee, that's a brilliant idea. How did you come up with that? Well, we have plannings and strategies and yada, yada, yada. Into the night they go with their stories. So this, I kind of pick on Charlie Rose. I mean, one thing I do admire him for is his seeming indefatigability. He does a morning show, and he does a daily evening 1-hour interview show. So he's got, I guess, a lot on his mind. He's largely sponsored by Coca-Cola, and he serves on the board of directors, or had served on the board of directors of Coca-Cola. Clearly no conflict of interest there. Now, in terms of the media, maybe some good news. I know I'm of the left and radical, so it's got to be all gloom and doom, but it's not all gloom and doom. I hate to disappoint you. There's really been some bright spots. One is the Intercept, which was created with the monies seeded by the founder of eBay, Pierre Omidyar, French-born, now Iranian American, who gave considerable amounts of money. I mean, we're not talking small change here, hundreds of millions of dollars to Glenn Greenwald, who then set up this website, The Intercept. He hired Jeremy Scahill and Murtaza Hussain in Toronto and Lillian Segura in New York and Laura Poitras to do investigative journalism. And Laura Poitras was the woman who did the documentary Citizen 4, which won an Academy Award, I think some recognition for Snowden and his work. I don't know if many of you saw that particular documentary. I almost didn't watch it. I thought, maybe you thought this way too. I know all this stuff, I've seen all the reports, but I found it incredibly moving on an emotional level. The integrity and honesty of Snowden was really striking. In a time when so many people, who face moral imperatives turn away and, concern themselves about the latest Kardashian divorce or, enhancement, shall I call it. For someone in such a young age, 28, I think at the time, or 29, knowing full well the consequences. He might never see his family again, may never see his loved ones, his friends, may never return to the United States again. To take that kind of risk, I think, is just exemplary, and I found it, deeply moving. I mean, it's a kind of detective story almost, because Greenwald didn't believe. He thought he was being set up by the NSA, which wouldn't surprise him or anyone, with these leaks, with these anonymous letters signed by Citizen 4. And it took months and months before they finally were able to connect with him and meet him in Hong Kong. And then that treasure trove of information was released, which has had a tremendous global effect. And some of the most outrageous examples of NSA spying may be slightly curtailed, although they haven't stopped building the $1.5 billion building in Bluffdale, Utah, where all of your text messages, cell phones, telephone communications will be safely stored. Of course, if you're not guilty and you haven't done anything, you have nothing to worry about, right? This is the line, and this is what security forces have been saying since eternity. You have nothing to worry about. Do you mind if I look in your trunk for a second, etc. So that has been really important, and I did mention The Guardian, very excellent British newspaper that's done a lot of this investigative work. Jazeera TV is now available in the US. They do excellent reportage, documentaries that no one else will really do about, particularly focusing on the Middle East, but also other parts of the world as well. The BDS movement has scored some successes. Just today, Code Pink announced that SodaStream was closing down its West Bank factory. This had been a target of a boycott led by Code Pink. And by the way, a shout out to the Raging Grannies here in Seattle who were at my talk yesterday and all the work that they're doing. Rise Up is located here in Seattle, as is Yes Magazine. There's so many great organizations you have here in your community, so much radio and so many alternatives. So here you don't have good excuses as you might have in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, where there's one gas station which is closed half the time and a 7-Eleven that's about to close. You've got opportunities here to get engaged and get involved. I'm leaving tomorrow, but this is your community, this is where you live, this is where you can make an impact, whether it's dealing with that shell rig out in the harbor or other crucial issues. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is up for a vote, given the tremendous negative outcomes that NAFTA has produced over now 2 decades, one should be very leery about these free trade agreements, which will undermine sovereignty, undermine U.S. law, and carries provisions which are enacted in secret. Not a formula for a real free trade agreement. It sounds like more and more closed trade, more and more profits for corporations, and more undermining of democracy. So keep your eye on that. Now, the U.S. has been, intervening in the Middle East almost nonstop since 1945. I want to just give you a little bit of the background as to, kind of the origins of the policy, which over the decades has been very consistent. There'll be some slight nuances here and there, but the overall trajectory remains absolutely consistent. By 1942, certainly by 1943, it became very clear to FDR and the planners in Washington that the United States was going to emerge victorious from the war and also be almost entirely unscathed, suffering no damage. The Soviet Union had broke the back of the German Wehrmacht in 1942 at Stalingrad, and the U.S. was on a trajectory to come out as the top dog. Britain and France were virtually demolished. By 1945, the end of World War II, 50% of all of the world's manufacturing and much of its gross national product was concentrated in the United States. So Roosevelt, like any far-reaching political leader, asked his State Department to lay out a scheme for what the world would look like at the end of the war. And these are called Grand Area Strategy documents. You can look them up on the internet. They're referred to in this book with Chomsky, Propaganda in the Public Mind, as well as Power Systems. It's all out there if you care to get just a little bit of dirt under your fingernails to find out the information. So Washington, in these documents, identifies the oil reserves of Saudi Arabia and the Middle East in general, and I'm quoting here, as a stupendous source of strategic power and one of the greatest material prizes in world history. And the corollary to that was, and we're going to get it. Now, there was a slight problem because the Brits were still there in the Middle East, albeit much weaker, and on the periphery of British power was French power, as a result of the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916, the Balfour Declaration of 1917, which cut and diced the Middle East, created borders where there were no borders before, broke Kuwait away from Iraq, creating a fully controlled British crown colony, creating Jordan, the borders of current-day Iraq and Palestine, and not Egypt, but of Syria. And In 1943, FDR signed an executive order which stated that the defense of Saudi Arabia is vital to the defense of the United States. There was one problem, and this was identified by his minister, Harold Ickes, Secretary of the Interior. He said that there was a foreign power in the region that could jeopardize U.S. interests, not naming that foreign power very clearly, Britain. So and then Anthony Eden, who was then the British Foreign Secretary, later Prime Minister, he complained to Churchill in 1943 about the difficulty of keeping the Americans in line. They didn't seem to know their place, you know, that this part of the world was controlled by His Majesty's Empire. You know the joke that Tariq Ali tells about the British Empire, you know, that the sun never set on the British Empire. That's because God didn't trust the British in the dark. You might say the same thing about the Americans if you were around. On February 12, 1945, something very significant happens. FDR, at this point he's dying, literally. He'll be dead in 2 months in Warm Springs, Georgia, of a massive heart attack. He's flying home from Yalta, where he had just, in the Crimea, in the Ukraine. He had just met with Stalin and Churchill. In the Middle East, in the Suez Canal, he meets with Abdulaziz ibn Saud, the king of Saudi Arabia, on the US destroyer, the Quincy. And then this is where the Faustian bargain is struck. There, FDR guarantees the defense of the Saudi monarchy against any and all outside forces. In return for what? I mean, this is a quid pro quo. Total US and only US access to Saudi oil reserves. So if you want to talk about, you know, a deal struck with the devil that has ramifications until today, from Pakistan to Syria and ISIS and the Taliban, you can trace it to this moment in history. And one of the clearest and most lucid accounts of US post-war strategy was by George Kennan, this very humane, liberal, intellectual, that highly regarded. He wrote a now declassified top secret document, which, you know, outlined the basic thinking of the time. Quote, "We stand before something of a dilemma." Okay, what was the dilemma facing Washington? We have about 50% of the world's wealth, but only 6% of its population. In this situation, we cannot fail to be the object of envy and resentment. Our real task in the coming period is to devise a pattern of relationships which will permit us to maintain this position of disparity. So that's the crucial task affecting all American administrations since the end of World War II, how to maintain this position of disparity and to devise a pattern of relationships. So you have the creation of these military alliances like SEATO, like the Baghdad Pact, like NATO and others, to act as kind of local cops on the beat. Whenever necessary, the US will deploy its forces, but it prefers to have local gendarmes do the job. So in this case, in the Middle East, interestingly, all non-Arab players, Israel, Pakistan, and Turkey, and Iran. These were the 4 local cops on the beat. So if there was any uprising or disturbance, they would send their troops or police forces. But if things, of course, got out of control, then you have to call police headquarters in Washington, and the Marines will land and, you know, do the needful, as they say in South Asia. And to, again, digress, I came across this current edition of Time magazine featuring the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi. The world needs India to step up as a global power. 1 year in, can Prime Minister Narendra Modi deliver? An exclusive Time report. This is the man who presided over a major massacre of Muslims in the Indian state of Gujarat in 2002. It became such an infamous figure that when he tried to visit the US in 2005, he was denied entry into the country. You should know something that's not mentioned in this particular article, a bit about this man's background. Imagine a US president being elected who was a card-carrying member, a charter member, and proud of it, of the KKK. Well, Narendra Modi is a charter member of an extreme Hindu fascist militant group known as the RSS, Rashtriya Sevam Sevak Sangh, RSS, it's known by those initials, carrying out pogroms and massacres of not just Muslims, but also of Christians as well. They believe in Hindustan, that India should be a land for the Hindu people, and there's no place for these other minorities. So he is that member, and there is no reporting about this. And I think it's absolutely scandalous that he is getting now a blank check and is being greeted and honored. And again, as Lily Tomlin said, you can't keep up, with cynicism. Obama not only meets him in the Oval Office, then walks with him to the Martin Luther King Memorial in Washington, D.C., and there's a photo op there. Here's a man who presided over a major massacre of Muslims and has never apologized for it, has never even acknowledged it. And I think that's, again, kind of the double standards that go on. And, speaking of our great magazines, the current Newsweek has, "Can America Win a War?" Gee, it looks like we're in trouble with our, the greatest fighting machine in the history of the world, as Barack Obama says time and time again. He boasts about, we have the finest fighting force in the history of the world, but it seems that, we can't quite affect the outcomes that we want with this greatest fighting force. I don't know about you, but I'd like a president to say, we have the greatest environmental protection program in the history of the world, the greatest health system in the history of the world, the greatest educational system in the history of the world that is free from kindergarten right through graduate school. If the money that was not being squandered on militarization, on the Pentagon, and the garrisoning of the earth with over 735 military bases, all of that money could be devoted to the common good. We would be transformed in America. Poverty, which is approaching 50 million, which is a scandal in this country, can be eliminated. And Obama announced a couple of years ago, the recovery is in full gear. Yeah, it's been in full gear. He didn't make that up. It's been in full gear for the 1/10%, which has gotten 95% of all economic gains since 2010 when Obama made that particular announcement. So we have, I know Joseph Stiglitz has been here talking about income inequality. There's wealth inequality. We have huge issues here in the homeland that we are not addressing. I mean, witness that train accident on the East Coast. Just one of many kinds of disasters, falling bridges, tunnels that need to be repaired, electrical systems, sewage, all of those kinds of things. And of course, topping the list has got to be averting the eco-crisis and lessening the impact of global warming, because that is going to be a huge issue in coming years. So there's a lot to do, and I think it's imperative that we start moving on some of these issues. And just to go back, on the Middle East and the structures there that we've created, the crushing of democracy in various states. I mean, we see that right now in Egypt, where Kerry went and shook hands with General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and called recent Egyptian elections historic. Yeah, they were historic. Sisi got 97% of the vote. in a Soviet-style election. I mean, we don't have the Soviet Union to kick around, but we have the memory of those kinds of elections where one candidate got virtually all the votes. They have just condemned Mohamed Morsi to death. Egypt has is now holding the world record for number of prisoners condemned to death and have been executed. Tens of thousands are being held in prison, are being tortured. The country is guilty of massive human rights violations, and the U.S. has just released $1.3 billion in military aid. The last thing Egypt needs is more military aid. They need food for a hungry population. We should be the superpower for food, for medical aid, for doing the kinds of things we're doing in Nepal, not the superpower for arming states that are gross violators of human rights, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates. These are not even countries. Think of them like Walmart. They're family-run businesses, and you have enormous concentrations of power. Now, the use of the word terrorism, which is rife, of course, by politicians and the corporate media, is highly refined and selective. Again, I refer you to these books, particularly the Iqbal Ahmed book, Terrorism, Theirs and Ours, because we only focus on their terrorism. What we do is responding, is defensive, is not terrorism. So you have a total one-way hijacking of the lexicon. So this use is highly refined and selective, just like the use of international law. It applies to designated enemies. So if Syria does something we don't like, or North Korea, or Iran, then we were all talking about international law, the inviolability of borders, international frontiers. Well, you can see that. I mean, how preposterous that is. People see this very clearly outside the country. Inside the country, because of propaganda, people are largely, isolated from these kinds of perceptions. Look at Saddam Hussein invading Iran in 1980. We applauded that. We not only applauded that, we took Iraq off the State Department terrorist list and put Cuba on. Again, one of the great ironies of the 20th century. Cuba, the target of the most sustained, extensive terrorist campaign possibly in history, Operation Mongoose. You've heard about the assassination attempts. I mean, beyond that, it was chemical warfare, it was germ warfare, it was, exploding pens and all kinds of things to overthrow the Castro regime because they were afraid of the threat of a good example. This has always been, again, independent nationalism, the threat of a good example, a possible alternative to the existing system of power and control as defined by Washington. And September 11th, of course, is used as a bludgeon to silence us, to tell you to shut up. If you object to a new, more stringent infringement on our liberties, they come back and say, do you want another September 11th? Do you want to see more towers, burning, and you want to see more buildings attacked? Of course not. But, what's the relationship between policies that create international terrorism and the actual facts? So, for example, in Latin America, there's another understanding of September 11th. In 1973, a democratically elected government, again, the threat of a good example, had to be overthrown, resulting in the death in many more thousands than in New York or Washington, and the imprisonment and torture and exile of many tens of thousands of Chileans. Going back a little further in history, September 11th, 1906, at the Empire Theater in Johannesburg, Mahatma Gandhi's first demonstration of satyagraha, of nonviolent civil disobedience, when he objected to the regime's issuance of travel identity cards to the Indian population in South Africa. And that was the first example of that. So there are other September 11ths. But when we live in an empire, we don't, focus on these things which are considered distractions. And the U.S., again, has been intervening nonstop for decades in the Middle East. What has it produced? massive sectarianism, and strife. Can anyone say that Iraq is better off? I mean, Lawrence Wilkerson, who's no radical leftist, he was Colin Powell's chief of staff when Powell was Secretary of State, recently was quoted as saying that Iraq was better off under Saddam Hussein. Now, you know, you could say the same thing perhaps in Libya, which is now broken apart after the Anglo-American, Canadian, French campaign of bombing there. U.S. policy has produced death and destruction, but it's all buried in a blizzard of propaganda about democracy and human rights, while we back repressive regimes, feudal monarchies, as well as dictatorships, today in Egypt with General Sisi, and monarchies in Morocco and Jordan. A justification for all of these bases, invasions, and occupations are always cloaked with noble intent. And here and there, mistakes are made. And people say that, like today about Vietnam, well, it might have not have been such a good idea. They were well-intentioned, but their tactics were slightly off, etc. There is no clear use of the English language. This is something we learned from Orwell, from Chomsky, from George Lakoff, and other writers and thinkers. We have to speak clearly in identifiable language, not through the subterfuge of propaganda. And here, you know, you have no one less than Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, saying, you know, with constant repetition, we can convince people that a circle is a square and a square is a circle. These are only words, and words can be molded to produce what we want. Orwell, quoting here, Chomsky is quoting here, circus dogs jump when the trainer cracks his whip. Circus dogs jump when the trainer cracks his whip. But the really well-trained dog is the one that turns his somersault when there is no whip. And I think that describes very much a good portion of the corporate media, which doesn't require much coercion. They're proud to be part of the system. In fact, Tom Friedman even boasts about, you know, being invited for lunch with the Secretary of State or playing golf with the Defense Secretary. And that kind of access to power has always been very, very seductive, not only being richly rewarded financially, but access to power rather than being a representative of the people and trying to understand how power is operating. We get bombarded with all of these slogans about good intentions. Occasionally mistakes are made. Always these mistakes, by the way, you'll notice another linguistic trick here, is the use of the passive voice. There is no active voice, so mistakes were made. Vietnam was a tragedy. People died. How did they die? People died. You know, the village was wiped out. How was it wiped out? The town was razed to the ground. All these uses of passive voice, again, deny accountability and deny understanding and holding people accountable. I think that's, you know, absolutely important. So I'm going to wind this up because, you know, I want to get to a book signing. And well, I'm not going to wind it up. Sorry. You're in an area where there's a lot of water. Whoa, very deep. David, how did you figure that out? By looking out the window. But I want to talk to you about two ships, one fictive and one factual. The fictive one is the Pequod. And I'm inspired by Edward Said, who had this insight into Melville's masterwork, Moby Dick, which can really be read as a kind of metaphor for empire and rapacious, predatory, runaway capitalism. The demonic Captain Ahab represents a quest for power and domination that is a death wish. Hubris will doom Ahab and his Pequod crew. All perish except for Ishmael. Is there a larger lesson to be learned? Is the United States much different? The U.S., with its obsessive drive for control of oil and other resources, its relentless hunger for profits, its garrisoning the globe with military bases, its arrogant disregard for the environment, is on the same suicidal path as Ahab. Washington's policies under both political parties are always imbued with benevolence and noble intentions, as I've mentioned. It is innocent of imperialistic designs. Freedom and democracy are always its goals. A well-disciplined media and intellectual class rarely challenge these embedded assumptions. We continue to ignore all warnings as to the destruction we are wreaking on the planet. And there's the symbolism also of the white whale, whiteness being purity, and Ahab being this capitalist demon that has to destroy purity, the environment, which is what the whale is, at least in that interpretation, which I subscribe to. Now, the Titanic, you've heard much about moving deck chairs on the Titanic. It almost seems like a cliche, but most of the things that have been put forth since the Rio Climate Summit in 1992, the same year that 1,700 scientists and 104 Nobel Peace Laureates issued a warning to humanity that there is soon a looming environmental crisis tied to global warming and that urgent action is needed. This came out in 1992. When I talked about this at Texas A&M, of all places, in Fort Worth, someone actually corrected me in the audience and raised his hand and said, you know what? The Club of Rome talked about it even earlier, 10 years earlier, that there was something happening with the climate and we should be paying attention to it. So what's happened since the first Rio summit in 92 and this declaration, this warning issued by 1,700 of the world's most preeminent scientists? Virtually nothing. Other than some feel-good press releases, climate summits at Durban and Copenhagen and Rio again and Kyoto and Paris next year. All the great leaders get together. There's a press release. There's a group photo. There's, champagne glasses are lifted. And they all declare to a person, we are green. We love the environment. We are one with nature and Pachamama. We're with the people on this issue. And then they go home and it's business as usual. Corporations carrying out their looting and plundering. And a few placebos are tossed out there for us, recycling and some other things. But this is really moving deck chairs on the Titanic. The iceberg is clearly in view. You can't miss it. You would have to be totally ignorant of the scores and scores of reports that have come out from various scientific agencies, most important, the ICCR. I just got a sign here that I'm speaking way longer than I should, but are you still with me on this? It's not going to be enough. We need urgent action. We are treating this precious place that we have. There was one sign that I saw one of the kayakistas had, go find another planet if you can. We can't. This is it, this one pale blue dot in the universe that Carl Sagan called planet Earth. We have to take measures now, not next week, next month. There has to be a sense of urgency. And, it's not really coming from the corporate class because their profits are tied to the exploitation of the planet, treating it like a dumpster, maximizing gain, because that's the institutional imperative, the DNA of capitalism, if you will, is the generation of profits and dividends. If I'm a CEO of a major corporation, let's say I am, and I may know all these things, I read those reports. I know that climate change is happening. I may have children and grandchildren. Yes, I am worried about their future. But my institutional role is loyalty to you, the stockholders who have made me the CEO of this corporation. And you're interested in one thing: dividends, returns, profits. And that prevents capitalism as it's currently constructed from really aggressively addressing this issue, aside from some, placebos and, wonderful statements about how green they are and how they love Mother Nature. This is it. This is, the planet we have. So while we are talking about imperialism, we are talking about propaganda, I am talking about, all these issues. Ultimately, this will be the defining issue of the 21st century. And we're not talking about 2115. We're not talking about decades and decades down the road when we can deal with these things. It is happening right now. The signs of it are everywhere to be seen. So I would hope here that you will get involved and take action. And I think Chomsky in this book, the very last words are, it's in your hands. It's up to us. It's not up to some, magical force. It's not up to some fairy godmother that's going to land and, make everything right. It's going to take citizen protest, citizen engagement, citizen action. And the time for that, I think, is now. And let me just read a couple of things that he says here. We all want a change and we want it quickly, but it is a kind of marathon, Chomsky says. We're not in a sprint. And sometimes in this marathon, you sometimes go backwards. There's regression too. The last 30 years have been in some respects a period of regression, although in popular activism, it's been an expansion. History is never simple, and history is never static. History is not over. It is something that can be influenced by us, by people just like you, people just like Rosa Parks in Montgomery, Alabama, in December 1st, 1955, when she refused for the third or fourth time to sit in the back of the bus. And that ignited the Montgomery bus boycott. And by stroke of good fortune, Martin Luther King had just moved to Montgomery to take over a ministry there from Atlanta, and he became the voice of the civil rights movement. But he was pushed by a massive movement of African Americans in the South and their allies elsewhere in the country. And I remember Howard Zinn saying, who's pretty observant, he didn't see any signs of any kind of unrest among African Americans. It appeared to him, when he visited the South, that there was a tremendous amount of subservience and subordination, and that people were quiet. But there was something happening, under the broadwalk, under the topsoil. There was enormous ferment and organizing going on. And just a few years later, the Greensboro sit-ins ignited another new phase of the civil rights movement. As Chomsky says, if you had asked me, does it make sense to occupy Zuccotti Park in New York and Wall Street, I would have said, you're out of your mind. That couldn't possibly work, but it worked very well indeed for a limited time only, and certainly we have the Occupy movement to thank for injecting the 1%, 99% equation into the political discourse. I asked Chomsky, what advice would you give to young people starting out? And he says, every night when I come home and start to answer the day's hundreds of emails, many people are saying, I don't like the way the world is going. In fact, I can't stand it. What should I do? I point out that you're well on your way to answering the question yourself because you recognize there's a problem. There's no general answer for everybody. There's no right answer for every person in all circumstances. It depends on who you are, what your concerns are, what your options are, how much you want to devote yourself to it, and what your talents are. But you're probably pretty privileged. Otherwise, you wouldn't be writing me a letter on the internet. That means you have a lot of opportunities. It's not going to be easy. It never is. But you can make a difference. You just have to find your own way. It's in your hands. So as we are now winding down the evening, let me just quote from Native American leader the Duwamish chief Selth. I hope this is familiar to you. How can you buy or sell the sky, the warmth of the land? The idea is strange to us, he says. We do not own the freshness of the air or the sparkle of the water. How can you buy them from us? We know that the white man does not understand our way. One portion of the land is same to him as the next, for he is a stranger who comes in the night and takes from the land whatever he wants. The earth is not his brother, but his enemy, and when he has conquered it, he moves on. He leaves his father's graves and his children's birthright. It's all forgotten. There is no quiet place in the white man's cities, no place to hear the leaves of spring or the rustle of insects' wings. When the last red man has vanished from the earth and the memory is only the shadow of a cloud moving across the prairie, these shores and forests will still hold the spirits of my people. One thing we know, this earth is precious. Even the white man cannot be exempt from the common destiny. So we have a lot to learn from First Nations, from Native Americans. I'm finally going to conclude actually with a poem by the greatest Urdu poet of the 20th century. This is for all those Urdu speakers out there. I'm sure every one of you are very fluent in this language, spoken in North India, the official language of Pakistan, also spoken in official language of Jammu and Kashmir. The greatest Urdu poet of the 20th century was Faiz Ahmed Faiz. It's kind of unusual. His first name and last name is the same, F-A-I-Z. His most famous poem is called Bol, which in Hindi and Urdu means speak. It's the imperative, speak. So when you go, or when I could go to India, I can still go to Pakistan and Bangladesh and Nepal and Sri Lanka. You would go to demonstrations and sit-ins and pickets and the like, and you'd see huge placards with this word, the three letters, Bol, and everybody knew what it meant. And some of you may know I'm based in Boulder, Colorado, where there's Naropa University. It has an outstanding poetry department established by Allen Ginsberg and Anne Waldman in the mid-1970s. It just celebrated its 40th anniversary. If they get 70 or 80 people to turn out for a poetry reading, they're tickled pink. They think, wow, this Boulder's such a cool place. There's such support for poetry. Look at the turnout we have here tonight. Well, I've been at poetry readings in South Asia where the turnout was 70, 80, 90,000 people. And the poet would say the first line and the audience would respond with the second line. It's part of the oral culture that's so rich in South Asia. So Faiz was a trade union organizer and member of a union and proud of it, a journalist and proud of it, a communist and proud of it. He was jailed during the US-backed military regime of General Ayub Khan in the 1950s, and he was proud of that. And he wrote this piece, Bol. Bol ke lab azad hai tere, bol zaban ab tak teri hai. Speak, speak, your lips are free. Speak, your tongue is still yours. Speak, your life is still yours. Speak, there is little time, but little though it is enough time, enough before the body perishes, before the tongue atrophies. Speak, the truth still lives. Say what you have to say. Speak, your lips are free. Bol, bol, bol. Thank you very much.